We're now going to have a panel on human rights and censorship related to the Uyghur crisis. And we have some panelists. We have Professor Murphy from Sheffield. We have Adiljan from Secretary in the Norwegian Uyghur Committee. And we have Gerald Folkvord, the Policy Advisor at Amnesty. Can I get you all to the stage? Quite the distance I have to the to the panelists. Yeah. If this is a problem for the camera, just tell me to change it. All right, that's better. Okay, thank you very much, Laura. I wanted to zoom in on we want to start with the Uyghur crisis and talk a little bit about that. And I wanted to talk with you first, Adiljan, about, so you're a part of the diaspora here in Norway. And of course, the diaspora is one of the important sources of information outside of China to know about this situation. But I wanted you to tell us a little bit about the efforts you experienced from China in censoring that diaspora and talking about this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. The situation of the Uyghurs never have been good. Since 1949, when the Chinese government occupied East Turkestan, we have been targeted by the government as a extremist at that time. Then after 2011, suddenly we became terrorists. And at the beginning of 2017, the Chinese government started targeting us systematically. The concentration camps came. Unfortunately, when we have been talking about this kind of issues, no one believed us. I remember we conducted even a forum among the Uyghur people here in Norway, who has been approached via WeChat, the Chinese prototype of the WhatsApp, where the police in the China have been contacting the Uyghurs abroad and trying to get personal data, sensitive data, and try to censor them not to talk about the situation that are growing up in East Turkestan. It took almost about, yes, if we say, for example, in 2014 they started this one, then about 3 years or 4 years just to admit the concentration camps are existing there. The transnational repression was always there. The censoring of the activists always was there, but what has changed in 2014 is that broadly everyone, each single people in abroad have been approached by the police and tried to censor, not to talk about the situation that is escalating in the East Turkestan.
But what's the type of you live in Norway, you're approached by some Chinese agent, or?
Yeah, basically the first thing was they have been directly calling via WeChat and trying to get all the personal information. When we have reported this in 2018 to PSD, the intelligence here in Norway, and of course it happened in several countries too, they had changed the approach. Now the police was asking or taking hostage the family members in East Turkestan and requesting them to call, basically in a video call, where they, for example, saying that, okay, we're looking very good for your parents, so be quiet in abroad. So this is one of the types that has been registered by the Uyghurs abroad, but we have, of course, different versions of how the government is approaching us. For example, it can be attempt of the logging to your social accounts or emails, spams, phishing, even robocalls from the Chinese embassies, and it has been like always increasing when we been doing a very like kind of important things, like for example hearing in Norwegian Parliament in October when it has repeated. And of course, collecting all the information is very important for them to build the connection between the Uyghurs in East Turkestan and abroad, and when it's required to take the hostage, the family members, and persuade you to not to talk about. And we have one student who, for example, unfortunately, didn't provide this information of the personal data, where he have been living or studying, and as a result, what happened is first his father has been taken to the concentration camps, then his mother, and he finally lost the contact with his brother. So this kind of stories are broadly like kind of known in abroad.
All right. So they use the individuals in Turkestan to threaten the people outside of China then.
Yeah, it's general, of course, but for example, if you see, for example, in Turkey, so you have a little bit different. So there is even like direct people who is like kind of involved and saying, like you would see the consequences if you do not silence.
Do you experience this, Laura, when you're around the world talking?
I do, and it's a bit different, but as Adiljan is saying, this has been ongoing for a very long time. I started traveling to the Uyghur region in 2003. I went in 2004. 2004. I don't usually announce this. It's not my top credential, but my husband is a historian of Uyghur history. And so I've been going back and forth to the region for a long time. And I've only ever been arrested in one country. And I've been arrested multiple times in the Uyghur region, simply for standing outside of a mosque, for talking to people in a market, for being in a town that no foreigner had ever been to. The attempts at maintaining the PRC's desirable narrative about Uyghur life and Uyghur people has been long and ongoing, and this oppression has been long and ongoing. It's just now that people are starting to hear about it. We've been talking about it, as you say, for a very long time. Not quite. I haven't been talking about it since 1949, but you know, maybe if I'd had a chance, I would. But we watched as Uyghur people had their passports taken away, as tanks rolled in 2009 with 18-year-olds with machine guns on their backs, like threatening. Speakers were put in, cameras were put in. We've watched this apparatus roll out over the last 20 years, and it's only when concentration camps were built, and only after many people in the Uyghur community and allies fought really hard to get people to care at all, that we're able to get audiences to listen to us and to get legislative bodies to act. And there's very little that's being done in terms of the surveillance of both Uyghur people and the researchers and allies who are speaking out against it, and the censorship, the attempts at censorship that are going on wherever we are in the world. And so we know it's happening in the Uyghur region, but for instance, my university has an office in Beijing where people stand outside every day and tell the people who work in it, Han people, who work in that recruitment office, that they're terrorists. I get emails saying that I'm a terrorist. The Minister of Finance held a press conference to denounce me publicly, saying that me and my research team are affiliated with terrorists, that that my university is a fake university. It is not. That our research is undocumented, despite the hundreds of footnotes citing Chinese government directives and corporate documents and corporate reports, and so that apparatus is always there. There's always an attempt to silence us, but I think when we first started, when our friends started to disappear, to be honest, when our friends started to disappear, we've known for a long time, we've seen people disappear. We've seen wanted posters for 70 Uyghur young men in the streets of Kashgar after, whatever, some little store got robbed or something. We've seen this happening for a really long time. We've known this is happening. We've talked about it. But once people who had been neutral engineers at the university started disappearing, when people we knew couldn't possibly be political, we knew that something had changed. And we had sort of a family meeting, and we decided that our work was not as important as stepping up, and that our privacy and our ability to maintain our security was not as important as the lives of Uyghur people who we knew were being taken away. And so, you know, we knew that this was going to happen, but I mean, I never imagined that I would be, you know, denounced by a Minister of Foreign Affairs. That was way off my radar. But we knew that was what was going to happen. But we promised ourselves that no matter how much intimidation happened, that we would have to speak. And my university has been incredibly supportive as well, despite the fact that they're really struggling. They can't recruit Chinese students anymore. This is part of that censorship apparatus. But if we are silent, we do the work of the Chinese governments for it, right? We do their work. We do their propaganda. And so we keep speaking.
Gerald, can I ask you, so when we're talking about censorship, so a lot of this is the digital technology, a lot of it is personal information collected through digital instruments. Could you tell us a little bit about the use of digital technology in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur areas?
Yes. First of all, I would like to add what we've talked about now. At the bottom of all these things is a system and a legislation in China that provides the basis for criminalizing everybody who the Chinese government and the Chinese authorities and most of all the Communist Party doesn't agree with. So, you know, there is this famous directives for police personnel in the Uyghur region about things that identify people as probable terrorists. Everything from wearing a beard, or uncommon beard as it is said, from denying, rejecting to drink alcohol, many, many other things. And among them is also, among them is also having contact to people abroad. So by talking on WeChat to your family members abroad, you are already a suspected terrorist. So they can get you. And WeChat is fully surveilled, fully controlled by the Chinese government. So they can get you at any time. And the people abroad, Uyghurs more than anybody else, but not only Uyghurs, know that very well. Their loved ones can at any time be arrested just for talking to them. And which is, of course, a cruel and very effective means of oppression. And so that is the basis of that. And you also have a criminal law that says providing sensitive information to foreigners is a crime. It can actually be, you can sentence to death for that. And who defines what sensitive information is? That's the Chinese authorities. When you are brought to trial, then the Communist Party representative most likely will tell the judge, yes, this was actually sensitive information. And one of the first Uyghur human rights defenders I met was Rabia Kader, who all of you know, many know, and she was arrested for handing a newspaper to an American parliamentarian, which he could have bought at the next corner. And that was providing sensitive information to a foreigner, and for that she was sentenced to many years in prison. And she's now abroad, and every time she talks about human rights, Uyghur rights, one of her family members is tortured in China. So this is the framework for the whole thing. And this has been existing for a long, long, long time, because it's not only about surveillance. That's also important to understand. The whole system in control, government control China is built on the objective of the government and the Communist Party completely controlling information, the storytelling. people in China should perceive the world through the eyes of the Communist Party. That's very, very important, and that's how the system works. And that has been there for a long time, but in the last decade there has this vast, fantastic digital development where China very, very quickly became one of the world leaders, and many people think today is the world leader on surveillance technology, all kinds of digital technology to control the people. And that is actually mostly developed with the help of American companies. And so today you have, in addition to this system that wants to control information, it wants to get into people's minds and control what they perceive as the truth, you have all these digital abilities. And there is a lot talk of this social credit system that the Chinese authorities are working on. There's actually several versions of that, which is based on the idea that every Chinese citizen should have a digital identity, which he or she always carries around, and which enables the authorities to map everything this person says and classify this person as a good citizen or bad citizen, depending on what this person does. Everything from what kind of food he or she buys, whether he crosses the street or the right place, and obviously what kind of books they read, what kinds of discussions they have at home. And so there is a lot of development going on all the time, and it's also based on laws, new laws that have been developed through recent years, like the Digital Security Act. And all this technological development is being tried out in the Uyghur region. Because, as you said before, what is true for labor is also true for control. In the Uyghur region, the Chinese authorities can do anything, at least to the Muslim minorities, because there is nobody standing up. There's nobody who has the right to say anything about that, because then they will be coined a terrorist, and if they're lucky, end up in an internment camp. If they're unlucky, end up in many years in prison or just disappear or be sentenced to death or whatever. So now you have this huge surveillance system based on facial recognition, based on fingerprints, still actual, based on measuring of blood temperature, mapping of people's DNA, many, many things that is now being tried out in the Uyghur region, and the Chinese authorities test out how can this be used, how can all this information be combined to have total control of the people. But at the same time, the kind of the old-fashioned traditional means of control are also continuing. Adiljan can tell much more about the Communist Party cadres being sent to Uyghur families in the Uyghur region, and they live with them as so-called, I think they call them house friends or something like that, house guests, and they live with them and report back, is this a family good? Are they good Chinese? Are they bad Chinese? What are they doing? And everybody knows whenever you say anything wrong, it can mean the whole family ends up in an internment camp, if they're lucky again. And so you have this old-fashioned oppression, people being tortured, people being coerced, people being disappeared. At the same time, you have this modern technological system that is tested out and that uses everything up to your blood temperature for mapping you and persecuting you.
Can I say a quick follow-up?
Absolutely.
You reminded me that in many of the times when we were arrested in the Uyghur region in 2004 and 2005, one of the first questions we were asked was, are you trying to distribute sensitive documents? And we just stopped carrying anything with us so that no one got in trouble for receiving our message, right? But one of the things that was interesting was that there was no way to collect that data. There was no way to transmit that data at the time. We would get arrested. They would fill out a form on rice paper. It would go on top of a file cabinet this high. It would get put away, and who knows what happened. So people would say, "Aren't you afraid?" And I would laugh. I would say, nobody knows this happened. No one will ever know this happened. It doesn't go down on my permanent record, right? But now, every time you check into a hotel, you get iris scanned. Every time you cross out of a town, into a town, across a border, anywhere, you get iris scanned, face scanned, and so the apparatus for controlling both the people inside the country and outside the country has just rapidly expanded, and yeah, that's all.
And it's searchable, and it never goes away.
Yeah.
Good. I want to continue on this discussion on the digital oppression, but I also wanted, because we keep saying the camps, and we say we know what happens there, but could we also take a moment just to say what happens there? Like what is the situation in the camps? What are people exposed to? Could you tell us about that, Adiljan?
Yeah, the situation in the camps are horrible, according to the camp survivors, and we had them in the Norwegian Parliament in October, who told the very strong stories, and being even like kind of Uyghur and hearing it on daily basis, hearing from them, it was really like kind of again crushing us. Because we know that we have friends there, we have relatives, and maybe they are facing the same brutality. And what's happening in the camps, been told now by we have about like 12 camp survivors in the world who managed to go outside and now telling how it's inside. So it's just like kind of simply put, brainwashing. So you're starting your day with the songs, with the teaching of the Mandarin language. You have to forget your identity, your religion, and everything, all possible things. One particular thing that what Sætre told us, for example, it was that on Fridays and a holiday, it's for the Muslims, they forced to eat pork that is forbidden according to our religion. So this kind of, mental torture, not only physically but psychologically is really hard. Many tell about the kind of so-called black rooms where the people are tortured. The tortures can be like electrical shock, beating with the stake or other means, so many other things. And what you have to understand is that people who is like kind of living inside of the camps are in very horrible conditions. So for example, it's very small room, about 15 quadrat meters or something like, and many people are kind of sent inside just to be there, and you don't have a right to go outside. There is a small bucket that you have to use if you want to go to the toilet, and the people literally have to sleep in a row, so they can't everyone kind of at the same time sleep, because there is no place and room. And additionally, you have about minimum 4 or 5 cameras inside that room. So it can tell a lot of how the miserable and horrible the situation there. And talking about this is just really difficult for each and every Uyghur people. But yes, you can name a lot of the things. So rape, torture, everything is possible there inside. And additionally, these people, for example, the UTG, the Uyghur Transitional Database, has located about 234 locations of the camps. And what you see is that first it was just concentration camps. Now we see that nearby the facilities there is factories where the people are going and working, so forced labor.
I think it's important that we have this in mind when we discuss this. We talk on abstract levels, on digital technology, but it is at the bottom a very brutal regime conducting very brutal human rights abuses. I think we should remember, because I wanted to go into the more the international aspect, the relevancy for Norway and for the EU and for the rest of the world. So our experience with Chinese digital technologies is through Huawei, through Xiaomi, these various apps and technologies, TikTok, that we consume. And this has, of course, been a large debate in Norway. We had a debate on whether or not to use Huawei for our 5G network. And there is, of course, the free trade agreement. Could you perhaps, Gerald, I could ask you to, what is there a link between the domestic digital oppression in China to these international companies?
The most direct link is that's the same companies. It's the same companies that produce digital oppression and control in China that are also among the big players internationally. It's very relevant for us because we work with these companies, us in Norway, us in the West. It's also relevant for Norway especially because a lot of Norwegian pensions money is invested in some of these companies. The pensions fund has, so the oil fund as we call it, has withdrawn from some of the obviously most evil players, like those producing facial recognition software, are still inside others because they're very, very big. There is also this, if you remember a couple of years ago, there was this discussion whether Huawei should provide the 5G network in Norway. And the ones speaking out very clearly against this was the Norwegian security police. Not because they thought Huawei was a bad company, but they said, given Chinese legislation, they will be obliged to hand over every information they have access to the Chinese authorities if the Chinese authorities ask them for that. They have actually to do anything the Chinese authorities tell them to. And that's not because we know, but that's because that's what the law says. Among other things, the Digital Securities Act I mentioned before. And that's actually also a glimpse of hope for us in the human rights work, because technological companies in China are actually challenging the governments. They're among those who are asking for laws to be changed because they see this is they are saying this is becoming a real competition challenge for us. I mean, the stories about TikTok's troubles in the United States, we know a lot about, which ended with TikTok having to set up a separate company because they would not be allowed to export user data back to China. The same thing is more or less in Europe, but now it turns out they are probably doing it anyway. I'm very curious to see how this plays out. So it's not that the companies are bad, but it's that the rules, the Chinese rules and regulations always give the government access to anything they have. And the companies can't say no. And some of the tech company leaders in China are in big trouble actually with the authorities, because after some years listening to them, the new course of the government is getting even more restricting, brushing anything to the side when it could undermine full government control.
And we remember some of the stories of those big shots that did challenge the government, like Alibaba, and they were. We didn't hear from them for quite some time. So could we know, or there are these? So this is a huge industry, of course, but this industry, these technologies for censorship. There's also this alliance between the authoritarian states, or where China tries to export their oppressive means to other countries. But could you tell? Do you know anything about this, Laura?
A little bit. I mean, you probably know more than
Yeah, Ken, you mentioned this before. This is actually a reason for major concern. China has good cooperation with many other countries. Chinese authorities have invested a lot of political energy in presenting themselves as the leader of the developing countries. I think I've never been representatives from any other country who were so insistent on their country being a development country as the Chinese, because that's their role. We lead the world that has been oppressed by the industrial world, and will lead the developing countries. And they have very, very close ties. Actually, we find that very often when we want to move Chinese policy on international issues, we can sometimes move them through the African countries, because what's important for the African countries becomes important for the Chinese government as well. So it's a very, very interesting dynamics. And one of the things they do is, yes, they export surveillance technology and control technology of all kind. And what happens is that they sell this technology or hand it over in some kind of development cooperation to, I don't know, a country like Zimbabwe. And then the Zimbabwean authorities says, well, thank you very much, but yes, we have all this fantastic technology, but we have nobody to run it. Why don't you do that for us? And so suddenly China is running surveillance in Zimbabwe. And that is not because China is especially interested about knowing everything about any citizen in Zimbabwe, but it's practical. And what's even more important is that the local authorities, the national authorities, can't do without the Chinese. It's a bit like we know it from the arms industry. Once you buy weapons from the United States, you will always have to keep on buying them because it's still the Americans who sit on all the technology and never give it a know-how. And it's a bit the same thing here. Once you install the Chinese surveillance technologies, you are dependent on the Chinese authorities to help you running it. And it does much good. It's not only surveillance, it's also healthcare technology, all kinds of stuff. So the digitalization of developing countries is a very, very important issue, obviously. Only that when it comes from China, it comes with no strings attached, with no questions asked. You do with that stuff whatever you want, and if you want us to control your people for you, then we do that for you. And that's obviously, and that's also a scare, I might add, because obviously focus on digital development is not only an issue in relationship to China. Norway, for some years ago, the Norwegian government presented actually a very good strategy for strong digital focus in development cooperation, helping countries become more digitalized. Now, if you digitalize a country's health system, and then you combine that with Chinese surveillance, there is no limit to what can happen.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want just to add that, for example, there is a pattern in Central Asian government where, for example, the Chinese government provides this kind of solutions and call them like kind of safe city solutions. And what is happening is what interesting is that they're giving a loan to provide this kind of solution, but at the same time, this loan is used for the Chinese tech company that will be kind of installing this solution. So afterwards, all the information that's collected is gained and stored in Chinese cloud. And what's important here, and I think it's general in the world, is that most people do not understand that the privacy data are important. Here in Norway, okay, we have in some extent, but sometimes when I'm talking to Norwegians, I'm struggling to explain that, for example, using TikTok is not maybe wise, or for example Zoom, and they say, we have like, you know, data testing and I don't know, other things. And yes, we have kind of some extent regulation and protection here in Norway via regulations and law, but unfortunately in China it doesn't work like that. It's vice versa. You collect all the information, government has all the possession, and they can do whatever they want. And we have seen that, for example, Douyin, the Chinese version for the TikTok, TikTok is for the whole world, and Douyin is just for the Chinese market. Is that, for example, they have audio censorship for the Uyghur language. For example, if you talk too much in Uyghur language in that Chinese version, then you will be blocked. So this feature can be used directly in the TikTok too, if it's requested. Or for example, the geolocation, because there are massive of the information that is collected and stored. So every step can be like kind of known for the Chinese government, and we have to think about this.
And I think people don't realize, and legislators aren't acting on this knowledge. We know this. You have to choose to have your Zoom end-to-end encrypted. You have to choose to have it not sent to Hong Kong or to China where it can be relayed. I of course, have those settings turned on when I use Zoom, but if I'm on somebody else's Zoom, they don't necessarily know it. These are not... Protecting our data is not a standard feature. It's not regulated in even businesses in our own countries. And so it's shocking to me that there just isn't a constant barrage of new legislation going through for protecting data that would protect us from surveillance. I just assume that my phone is listening to me. It makes me feel crazy, but I have to assume that. And there's nothing to protect me no matter where I go. Much less, protect, any individual person, but to protect all of us from our data being sent to China.
Everyone knows what settings to change when they get back home now.
I will send you an email with a list of them if you need it.
But I want to open the for questions from the audience as well. And while people think a little bit about questions, I also wanted to ask you, Laura. You talked about this. The tide is turning, but what should be our? I guess there will be, or later today, there will be more discussions with politicians and Norwegian response, international response. What should I do? What should I do in my everyday life?
Personally?
Yeah.
I think you have to stop buying all things.
Everything.
Pretty much. No, I think that consumer choices have limited effect. I think that our main goal should be pushing our legislators, speaking out, and saying, that we want a ban on imports with goods known to be made with forced labor. I mean, I want to say something that I find shocking. The United States, I think, is one of the friendliest, probably the friendliest countries for corporations, right? The Republicans in my country do not like to tell companies what to do. They like to be told what to do by the companies. And yet, we are the only country in the world that has a ban on forced labor-made goods being imported into our country. We've had it since 1930. This is shocking to me. Now, we wouldn't pass this law probably if we wouldn't have passed it in the 80s. It's important that it was passed in the 30s. But it is enshrined in my understanding that we do not import goods we know to be made with forced labor. But that does not exist here. That doesn't exist anywhere in the EU. There's like semblances of it. There are products made with prison labor that are banned, child labor sometimes, but forced labor products are circulating all over the world. We need this not just for the Uyghur cause, but because forced labor is everywhere, and this model is going to expand. I think it's looking quite profitable to other countries, right? We also need to be thinking about surveillance technology and limiting the data that we're sending out, and as individuals, we need to be being conscious of that for ourselves and pushing back when we see all these cameras going up, asking where that data goes, talking to our city councils about our smart cities. A camera just went up on my corner in New Orleans, and I was just like, there was no consultation, right? We need to be demanding that kind of consultation. It looked like you had something to add, and I'm sure I have other things.
I would just use the occasion to say, in Norway, we now actually have a due diligence law, which of course obligates the companies and not the government, which is a disadvantage, but it's actually there. And what we now need to do in Norway is to make it stronger, to actually also have a mechanism that holds companies actually responsible for example, ensuring themselves that the goods they import are not linked to forced labor. So the possibility we have, but we are still waiting to how this plays out and how much the government is actually willing to invest into this being an act that actually works.
That's right, and it has to be mandatory, and it has to be enforced. I mean, I think that this is the thing. Companies don't choose to regulate themselves. And so if we say, oh, we'd really like it if you did your due diligence. I mean, the do part in there should be enough to say, like, we're just asking for a bare minimum standard, right? But I think that people also don't realize how much impact we have as citizens. I certainly didn't until the last few years, where I've realized that we can actually impress upon our legislatures the importance of issues like this, that we can when we're coming with really well documented information, we can make a difference, that people do listen. But I do think as consumers we can make choices. I think that we should be asking all the time where our goods are made. I buy much more used clothing and used goods now than I could in the past. It's always difficult to buy like a computer cable or a pair of headphones. Those are, I mean, I've tried, and I trace supply chains for my life. That's what I do, and I can't do it all. But it's important that we look and we start buying things that are, right now you can't know if something made in China is made with forced labor. So I try to buy things that are not made in China at all, actually, now. So those are things you can.
Yes, because this is one of the other like issues of the consumer. My dismal kind of stereotypical worldview is that sure, I could buy an American product instead, 3 times the price, but in the end, there's some component it's made in China, or there's some software in it and it's made in China. Like it's difficult to find any alternative to this market.
The way I look at it is, first of all, it's reducing my consumption in general, which is a good thing. So like this consciousness is reducing my consumption. But it also is a matter of, the way I think about it is reducing my Uyghur oppression footprint, right? So I'm not going to be able to, I have to use a computer to unearth bad stuff going on. So I can't buy a computer that I know is made solely without forced labor in it. However, I mean, the DRC, I mean, it's just it's coming from everywhere, right? But I try to reduce my forced labor footprint as best I can. So I'm constantly looking for alternatives, constantly trying to buy used clothes, to consume less, things like that, because it does something. Now, again, it's not the main force that's going to change things. So it's just a piece of being aware and responsible. But the larger part is pushing companies, pushing government to change.
Yeah, I think individually we have to do, as you say, but it will be kind of unfair, and sometimes I'm very angry on companies that they persuade us, or they put us to that condition where we have to use sometimes the equipment that maybe have done by the forced labor. So a small step can be just like writing a letter to these companies and saying like, stop, because there is ongoing, I don't know, genocide, forced labor, and we know, and there is a lot of the reports, and no one can kind of ignore about that. And of course the government has to take more active role, because we have, thankfully, Transparency Act that now is law in Norway, but I think it's still weak, because there is a possibility of buying other things. And we have seen, for example, the police has bought DJI drones that is connected to the human rights violations in East Turkestan. So I think the government has to start investigating more and not be naive and more critical on the things.
I promised to open the floor, and we're running out of time. So now I actually have to open the floor. Are there any questions from the audience to the panel, or anything online? I'm not sure if anyone is paying attention online. There is a question here in the back. If you speak up, then I'll try to repeat it. Yeah, so the question is why try to control behavior? Anyone feel the call?
I can try. That's maybe a basic question, but it's a very, very smart question. Thank you. Because I've been working on China for some decades now, and I've always been struggling with trying to understand why they're doing this. And also when it comes to the oppression of Uyghurs. I mean, given the economic importance and trade importance of the Uyghur region, why don't they just build these companies, build these networks, and let the local population earn good money? Then everybody would be happy. No, they rather go in with the military and oppress everybody, but I think my observation is that the Chinese leaders are really paranoid of their own population's opinion of them. they do not trust in people trusting in them if they do not manipulate them. And which, of course, is holding the country back in every aspect, because there is so much potential there, obviously, if they would work together more with their people. But there is this basic idea: if we allow people to think for themselves and have access to information that gives them the ability to think about different solutions than the one we are presenting, then we are in trouble. And that's probably what lies around. And we talked about Liu Xiaobo, Nobel Peace Prize winner, who was in prison, died in prison. We are talking all too little, by the way, about his wife, who did nothing, and who was put in house arrest because her husband got the Nobel Peace Prize and was almost tortured into almost insanity at home. But apropos family members are being punished. But Liu Xiaobo, his crime was encouraging discussion. It was not what he said about the government that got him in trouble. You can say bad things about the Chinese government when you sit on a bus in Shanghai. Probably somebody will beat you up for it, but nobody will arrest you. But if you ask questions, if you say, shouldn't we discuss if this system we have still is the best system possible, then you are in deep trouble. And that's probably the explanation of this extremely paranoid control system that they have built. But I agree, it's hard to understand.
30 seconds, Laura.
Okay, I would say that I typically try not to personify emotions to them, for instance, or psychological conditions. But I do think that I've come around to the argument that it is really a deep anxiety about control and power, and the Uyghur region represents, to them, though I don't think in real terms before this crisis, represented to them the crux of dissent, and they wanted to maintain that. Also, there's a labor crisis across China. Price of labor is going up, and their competitiveness to keep everything at the lowest possible price is declining compared to Vietnam or Cambodia these days. And so they're seeing outsourcing or shifting in supply chains simply for the cost of production. And so moving production to the Uyghur region, where people are paid a third, a quarter when they are paid, it has represented significant decline in the price of the manufacturing of goods. So that's another reason. I have a list of 5, and I'm working on a little brief. I'll email it to you.
Adiljan, Laura, and Gerald, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for the panel.